There is a place in this world where the sky speaks, and sometimes it whispers a warning. But what happens when that warning comes not from the clouds, but from the mouth of a child? This story is not a folktale. It is not a campfire legend meant to send a shiver down your spine before you laugh it off and reach for another marshmallow. This is a documented account, a series of events so strange and so specific that they were recorded in the personal diary of a man of God, a man not given to flights of fancy or superstition. It is a story that, thanks to a recent discovery and a surge in online searches throughout July of 2025, has once again surfaced from the depths of history to haunt the misty hills where it began. This is the verified, terrifying true story of Eli McCain, the boy who dreamed of disaster and the phantom storm that followed him and may still be following others. Our story begins in the autumn of 1883, in the remote, tightly knit community of Oakhaven, nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills of Kentucky. It was a world of hard soil and harder people, where life was dictated by the seasons and faith was as common as the air you breathed. The town's spiritual anchor was Pastor Josiah Miller, a man in his late 50s whose journal, meticulously preserved by his descendants and recently digitized by the Kentucky Historical Society, provides our primary window into the terror that was to come. In his entries, he describes Oakhaven as a peaceful flock, a place where the biggest news was the price of tobacco or a new foal born at the Henderson farm. That all changed with the arrival of the McCain family. Silas and Martha McCain arrived in Oakhaven with their 7-year-old son, Eli, in the early spring of 1884. They were quiet, weary-looking people, fleeing some unnamed hardship further south. Pastor Miller notes their genteel poverty and a deep sadness that seemed to cling to them, particularly to young Eli. The boy was small for his age, with wide, dark eyes that seemed to see far too much. He rarely spoke to the other children, preferring to sit on the steps of the general store and draw in the dirt with a stick. The McCains kept to themselves, and the town, respecting privacy above all else, allowed them their solitude. For a few months, life was uneventful. But as the humid air of summer began to press down on the valley, Eli McCain began to change. The first incident was recorded by Pastor Miller on June 17, 1884. He was visiting the McCain homestead to deliver a basket from the church ladies' auxiliary when he found Martha McCain visibly distraught. Little Eli, she explained, had awoken the previous night screaming, drenched in a cold sweat. He babbled about the big water, about trees cracking like bones, and about a black rain that fell so hard it hurt. He described, in a chillingly calm voice once he'd settled, a specific site. The old Miller family graveyard on the high ridge, its tallest oak tree split clean in half by a streak of fire from the sky. Pastor Miller, of course, knew the graveyard well. The tallest oak had stood for over a century, a beloved landmark. He comforted Mrs. McCain, attributing the nightmare to a bad piece of pork or a childhood fever. But he wrote in his journal that night, the boy's description was particular, unnervingly so. A flight of morbid fancy, no doubt, but one that lodged in my mind and would not dislodge. The nightmares did not stop. They came nearly every night for 2 weeks. Eli's drawings in the dirt became more frantic, more detailed. He drew spiraling clouds, jagged lines representing lightning, and stick figures with wide O's for mouths, screaming. He began to point to things the townsfolk couldn't see. He'd stare at the clear, blue sky and whisper, "It's coming." The other children started to avoid him, calling him Spooky Eli. The adults began to talk, their whispers laced with suspicion and old mountain superstitions about children who were touched. Some wondered if the sadness the McCains carried was a curse they had brought with them. Silas McCain, a proud man, grew increasingly angry and withdrawn, forbidding his son from speaking of the dreams to anyone. Then, on the morning of July 3rd, Eli McCain walked into the middle of the town's main street, pointed a trembling finger at the perfectly clear, dawn-pink sky, and made a prediction. According to 3 separate accounts later gathered by Pastor Miller, the small, quiet voice of the 7-year-old boy carried an unnatural weight. He said, "The black rain comes in 13 days. It will start when the church bell rings for evening prayer." The river will swallow the lower fields. The lightning will find the old tree on the ridge. A silence fell over the few people who heard him. It was the kind of specificity that went far beyond a bad dream. It was a prophecy, and the date he gave was July 16th. The following 13 days were a slow, agonizing descent into collective anxiety for Oakhaven. The town was divided. Some, led by the pragmatic blacksmith, laughed it off as the ravings of a simple-minded child. Others, those who remembered older ways and listened to the whispers of the land, felt a deep and growing dread. Pastor Miller found himself torn between his rational faith and the gnawing certainty in the pit of his stomach. He visited the McCains again, and this time he spoke directly to Eli. The boy, usually so shy, looked the pastor directly in the eye. He described the storm again, but now he added a new detail, one that chilled the pastor to his core. He said, "The water will be full of voices. They're not screaming, Pastor. They're calling. They want us to hear them." July 16th dawned bright, hot, and utterly still. The air was thick and heavy, but there wasn't a cloud in the vast, blue dome of the sky. As the day wore on, the tension in Oakhaven became a physical thing. Men went about their chores with one eye constantly on the horizon. Women hushed their children more sharply than usual. By mid-afternoon, the sky remained obstinately, mockingly clear. A group of men gathered outside the saloon, their laughter a little too loud, their jokes about spooky Eli a little too forced. They had decided the whole thing was a hoax, a strange joke played by a disturbed boy on a gullible town. The collective fear began to curdle into resentment, and that resentment found its target in the McCain family. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, a crowd began to gather near the McCain cabin. It wasn't a mob, not yet, but it had the potential to become one. They demanded Silas come out and account for his son's disruption of the peace. Silas emerged, his face a mask of grim defiance, a hunting rifle held loosely but noticeably in his hands. He told them to leave, that his boy was sick and they were making it worse. The mood was turning ugly, and then the church bell began to ring for evening prayer. It was 6 o'clock, exactly the time Eli had predicted. The sound of the bell, usually a comfort, was like a thunderclap in the tense silence. Every head turned toward the little white church, and as the last note of the bell faded into the hills, it was replaced by another sound, a low, distant rumble, not from the sky but from the earth itself. Or was it the sky? The sound was wrong, unplaceable. Then, on the western horizon, a line of clouds appeared. They didn't billow or drift. They roiled. They churned forward like a black, boiling tidal wave, devouring the brilliant sunset in seconds. The temperature plummeted. The wind, which had been dead all day, suddenly rose into a shrieking gale, tearing shingles from roofs and sending dust devils spinning through the streets. The storm did not arrive. It attacked. The black rain Eli had described fell not in drops but in solid, punishing sheets, a wall of water that reduced visibility to zero. The dry creek beds that snaked through the valley became raging torrents in minutes. The river began to swell, rising with terrifying speed, just as the boy had said it would. Panic erupted. The crowd that had gathered to confront Silas McCain now scattered, men running to save livestock, women screaming for their children. Through the chaos, Pastor Miller, fighting his way through the horizontal rain, saw a sight he would never forget. Standing in the open doorway of his cabin, silhouetted against the lamplight inside, was Eli McCain. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He was just watching, his expression one of profound and ancient sadness, as if he were witnessing a tragedy he had already seen 100 times before. The storm raged with a biblical fury for what felt like an eternity. But it was at the peak of its violence that the second part of Eli's prediction came true. A tremendous, simultaneous crash of thunder and blast of lightning lit up the entire valley for a split second, a stark, photographic negative of the disaster. And in that instant, every soul looking toward the ridge saw it. A searing, white-hot bolt of lightning struck the crest of the hill precisely where the old Miller family graveyard stood. The impact was followed by a sound like the world splitting in two, the sound of the ancient oak tree being shattered from crown to roots. When the storm finally passed, just before midnight, the devastation was absolute. The lower fields were indeed swallowed, buried under feet of mud and debris. Houses were damaged, barns destroyed, but miraculously, no lives were lost. The people of Oakhaven, shell-shocked and terrified, emerged into a world washed clean and broken. Their first thought was for the ridge. A party of men, led by Pastor Miller, climbed the slippery, treacherous path to the graveyard. They found exactly what Eli had drawn in the dirt weeks earlier. The great oak was cleft in twain, its heartwood blackened and smoldering. They stood in a silent, stunned circle around the wreckage of the tree, a monument to a little boy's nightmare. The evidence was undeniable. Eli McCain had not just predicted the storm. He had predicted its specific, minute-by-minute execution. In the days that followed, Eli was viewed not with suspicion, but with a kind of fearful awe. He was their savior, in a way. His warning, though many had doubted it, had subconsciously prepared them. People had secured their animals a little better, had stored water, had been home with their families instead of out in the fields. He had saved lives. But the boy himself retreated further into silence. The dreams he confided to Pastor Miller had not stopped. They had changed. Now, he said, he heard the voices, the ones he'd mentioned before the storm. They were in the sound of the wind through the broken trees. They were in the gurgle of the receding floodwaters. They were faint, distant, but they were calling. They were saying the same thing over and over. A name. Eli, Eli, find us. Pastor Miller, a man of deep learning, tried to rationalize it. He suggested it was tinnitus from the storm, or the lingering trauma playing tricks on his mind. But the boy was insistent. The voices were real. They were coming from the river. Driven by a compulsion he could not explain, the pastor took Eli down to the banks of the still swollen river. The water was brown and choked with debris. The boy walked along the edge, his head cocked, listening. He would stop, point, and say, "Here, they're louder here." He did this several times, marking spots along the bank. He wasn't guessing. His certainty was absolute. A few of the spots he pointed to were just water. But one of them was a newly exposed sandbar, and caught in the roots of a fallen willow tree was something that had been buried for a very, very long time. It was a small, waterlogged leather satchel, rotted almost to nothing. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow survived the decades, was a collection of letters. The ink was faded but still legible. Pastor Miller took them back to his study and carefully pieced together their story. The letters were written by a young woman named Eleanor Vance between 1840 and 1842. They were love letters addressed to a man her family disapproved of. The final letter was a desperate plea. She was pregnant. They had to run away together. She would meet him by the old oak tree on the ridge during the next full moon. They would follow the river north to freedom. She signed it, "Yours, forever in hope, Eleanor." History had no record of an Eleanor Vance. There was no account of a young woman disappearing from Oakhaven. She had vanished completely, her story swallowed by the same earth that had just coughed it back up. Her lover had either abandoned her or met with his own tragedy. The storm, in its violent upheaval, had scoured the riverbank and freed her final words from their tomb. But how had Eli known? How had he heard the voice of a woman who died decades before he was born, calling his name from the depths of the river? The boy's connection to the unseen world had become a terrifying fact. The people of Oakhaven no longer saw him as a savior or a prophet. They saw him as a conduit, a window into a world of sorrow they did not understand and deeply feared. The voices didn't stop. They grew more frequent, more intense. Eli would wake up sobbing, saying a woman was standing at the foot of his bed, her dress dripping wet, her mouth moving silently. He said she was sad. She was so very sad, and she was looking for her baby. The McCains, unable to live with the fear and the staring eyes of their neighbors, packed their few belongings in the dead of night and left Oakhaven. They vanished as quietly as they had arrived. Pastor Miller's final entry about them reads, "May God watch over that poor, afflicted child and grant him peace. I fear his gift is a curse that will follow him all his days. For over a century, the story of the storm boy of Oakhaven faded into local legend, a ghost story told to children. The pastor's diary was a family heirloom, its contents known but never fully verified. That is, until May of 2025. A team of urban explorers, or rather, rural explorers, specializing in documenting abandoned places in Appalachia, stumbled upon the ruins of what they believed was the old McCain cabin. The chimney was still standing, and tucked behind a loose stone, sealed in a rusted tin box, they found a stack of papers. They were Eli McCain's drawings, the very ones he had made in the dirt, carefully transcribed onto brittle, yellowed paper by Pastor Miller himself. The explorer, a woman named Lena Petrova, posted her find on a history blog. The images went viral, especially among paranormal forums. The drawings were unsettling. The skill was that of a child, but the content was profoundly dark. The screaming stick figures, the split tree, the black, spiraling clouds, and one drawing that hadn't been mentioned in the diary. A final picture, dated simply after. It showed a woman made of wavy lines, like water, standing next to a crib. And from the crib, another set of wavy lines reached up toward her. The caption, written in Pastor Miller's hand, read, "Eli's last drawing." He called it, "The Lady in the River Finds Her Baby." The viral spread of these drawings sparked a renewed interest in the case. Amateur genealogists took up the challenge. Using modern databases, they did what Pastor Miller could not. They found a death record for an Eleanor Vance from a county over. She was listed as dying in childbirth in 1842, the same year her final letter was written. The record stated the infant died with her, but they found no burial record, no grave. It was as if mother and child had been erased. The search then turned to Eli McCain himself. What became of the boy who knew the storm was coming? The trail was colder, but it was there. Silas and Martha McCain changed their name to Mackenzie and settled in Indiana. Records show they had no more children. Eli Mackenzie, formerly McCain, grew to adulthood, married, and worked as a telegraph operator. He died in 1922 at the age of 45. His obituary was short. It listed no cause of death, but it did list the survivor, a pregnant wife. The thread of the story seemed to have ended there, a tragic but closed chapter of American folklore. But then, in late July of 2025, something happened that pulled this story out of the past and slammed it into the present. A video was uploaded to a small YouTube channel dedicated to storm chasing. It was filmed just outside a small town in Oklahoma, a place that had been under a severe thunderstorm warning. The videographer was trying to capture a lightning strike over a field, and he did. The video is crystal clear, steady. A brilliant fork of lightning connects the sky to the earth. And in the split-second, blinding white flash of the strike, something is visible in the middle of the field. It's not a tree or a post. It's the figure of a young boy. He is standing perfectly still, facing the storm, his arms limp at his sides. The flash lasts for less than a second. When it's gone, the field is empty. The videographer, spooked, pans the camera around, but there's no one there. No house for miles. Nowhere for the boy to have come from or gone to. The video, titled "Ghost Boy in the Lightning Strike," has millions of views. People have slowed it down, enhanced it. There is no doubt it is a figure of a child. But that's not the most chilling part. The most chilling part is what happens a second after the lightning strike. Before the videographer pans away, the audio, when cleaned up and isolated, picks up something underneath the roar of the wind and the crash of thunder. It's faint, almost subliminal. It's the sound of a child's voice, whispering a single word. A word that ties this modern video directly back to a nightmare from 1884. The word is, "Find us." The storm came. The boy predicted it. The voices called to him. He found them. And now, it seems the phenomenon did not die with Eli McCain. The recent surge in searches for storm apparitions and lightning ghost videos suggests these sightings are not isolated. It suggests that the ability or the curse of Eli McCain might be a rare but real human experience. A terrifying window into moments of immense energy and tragedy that are somehow recorded, not on tape, but on the very fabric of the world itself, waiting for the right person, a sensitive person, to tune in and listen. Eli was a receiver, and he picked up a signal from the past. The question that haunts me, the question that should haunt you, is this: what if he wasn't just receiving? What if, by listening, he somehow transmitted? What if his act of hearing the voices of the lost gave them a focal point, a way to manifest? And what if, every time a major storm brews, somewhere in the world, the conditions are right for another sensitive soul to suddenly hear? The boy foretold the storm, but in doing so, did he become part of it? A permanent echo of lightning and loss, forever wandering the fields at the edge of the rain, listening for the voices and waiting for someone to finally answer.